when you grow a plant, you put the plant in the earth, you know, and you're going to water it, but you cannot control how the plant is going to grow. The plant grows by itself. Music is like that, you know, you have no control, and it just does what it wants and does what it wants with you, and I think that's the beauty of it. I started playing the piano, from what I remember, the thing that I did first was singing along with records at my parents' place and also at my uncle's and my grandmother's place. I didn't have any musician in my family, but there were lots of music lovers, and they listened to lots of classical music and traditional jazz, what's traditionally called traditional jazz. And I remember singing along with those things and tapping and you know, stuff like that. So they decided that would be an interesting thing for me to do, music, because I seemed to be, you know, singing what I heard and tapping to it. So I remember playing the recorder actually at school before I even played the piano, and then they brought me to a very nice old teacher, and I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I started taking piano lessons, but I didn't have a piano at home yet. I had a piano at home when I was 8 or 9 years old, and she taught me, you know, basic technique, Mozart, Beethoven, sonata, stuff like that, but already at that time what I loved to do is listen to records and play on the piano what I heard, and also improvise. I've always written music. I mean, to me, write music doesn't mean anything. People make a difference between writing and improvisation. I think they're very wrong. I think it's a misunderstanding of what music is all about. It's just a difference in medium. You know, it's just like a CD and a vinyl, or a live performance for that matter. You know, if I go listen to a great live performance and then I listen to a great record, it doesn't make much of a difference to me. I'm sorry to say, because it's the sound, you know, it's the music. People are very impressed by the image, but to me it was always about the sound, you know. So to me, improvisation is just writing music on the spot, and writing music is just improvising on the paper. It's just a difference of, I'm sure Mozart, when he wrote a symphony, it was there, he was improvising it in his head, you know, and then he had to put it on paper because he didn't have much of a choice. That was the way music was transmitted then. But to me, it's all about creating music. It's all about the inspiration. You're in a big wave of inspiration, and then you have different mediums to express it, but I don't think it makes much of a difference in terms of the process itself. My involvement playing with other people came quite late also, which means I basically played by myself on the piano until the age of maybe 17 or 18. Then I met a couple of musicians at school and I played with them, but you know, the level of what we were doing was pretty bad. And then I met the Moutin brothers, you know, François and his twin brother Louis, who played drums. And that was when I was 21-year-old, I think, or maybe 22. And that's the first time I ever played with really like good musicians. And it felt very natural right away, because let's put it this way, I had always heard music played collectively. When I was listening to Biggs or Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington, you hear collective music, what I call improvised chamber music. That's what jazz is to me, more than anything else. That's at least the way I like it the most. So when I started playing with these guys, I heard it right away, you know. So I think playing with other people is not something that you learn. It's, you know, it's like when you're a child and you learn how to speak. You learn how to speak by talking to other people, you know. And because, you know, speaking is about the exchange. I think music is the same, and the strange thing about me is that I learned it by myself, but in a way I was already having conversation with other musicians through the records, and when I started playing with other musicians, for real, it just was an immediate extension of what I had already heard. And it's difficult for me to explain it in words, but I can feel it physically. So the first note we played together, I was like, wow, that has been in me all the time, you know. It was a very powerful feeling. A tune is really something that I heard, and in improvisation is something that I hear as well. You know, it's in both cases, it is material that gets to me through inspiration, that I can hear and feel, and the way it comes out, it's just, I mean, I would say the final detail, you know. Is it comes out on the paper, does it come out in the sound? But originally it was something that I felt and heard. You know, I have that thing that I call the love rule, which means that anything that applies to music applies to love and vice versa, and anything that doesn't apply to love doesn't apply to music and vice versa. I mean, to me, music and love are exactly the same thing. For example, some people ask me, what's your conception of music? What's your concept? And I like, would you ask somebody what's your conception of love and what's your concept in love? That would sound like a stupid question. And I'm like, that's exactly the same thing. You know, I mean, your question doesn't ring true because music is like love. You know, there is no concept or conception, at least for me. That's the way I perceive music and I feel music and I live music. You know, love is a very multi-dimensional thing. There is, you know, affection, there is attraction, there is passion, there is sometimes there is just quietness and serenity. You know, there are lots of those things in love. It's a multi-dimensional thing. Same with music. When you compose music and when you improvise, it's just two different dimensions of that thing. And I think people make way too much of what do you play, where do you come from, what have you been influenced by and stuff. They are so obsessed by the why, the what, the where, from where, to where, how, that they, you know, and that's something that if you apply all those questions to love would sound absurd. And I think they are absurd when it comes to music. I'm still very upset when one of my students tells me that he doesn't know anything about classical music. I'm like, you have this incredible gold mine in front of you that's basically the origin of jazz. Jazz comes from there, you know, Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart were the jazzmen of the previous century, you know. And they don't know anything about it. And I'm like, not only do you lose something technically, that's for sure, but you lose musically, you cut yourself from something that's absolutely essential for any musician, regardless of the style, you know. And that's another problem now, is that people are so obsessed by labels that when they say jazz, suddenly classical music seems to be thrown out of the picture. But all this is music. Let's go back to reason here. I've been teaching, I mean, I would say a long time, because I was teaching back in France. I was teaching in a couple of schools when it was probably like 20 years ago, I would say. Actually, when I started teaching here at NYU, because I had been teaching almost only privately so far. And then here I discovered teaching ensembles and doing workshops more. And that really, really, really interested me. And then it kind of like extended itself to my private teaching in return. That I discovered that teaching privately was actually doing an individual workshop with every one of my students. There was really something, like it was like we built a story together, you know. And I mean, they built their own story and I was just pushing the right buttons at the right moments, I think, or at least trying to do so. So I don't consider myself as a teacher, I'm more like a coach. For me, it's about finding what's in the student that needs to come out. Here again, I have a project for a solo recording, and solo piano has become a very important thing in my life. I have always played solo, you know, like I said, from a young age, but for some reason my solo playing, I didn't get satisfied by my solo playing until very recently. I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where I really felt like something fell into place. I think I was really trying to play the piano all those years, and suddenly I switched to making music.